Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the idea of Rome. You know, that concept famously captured by those four iconic letters, SPQR, the Senate and People of Rome. As we're going to see throughout this explainer, Rome's history is the ultimate story of survival through relentless, ruthless adaptation. Yet, paradoxically, its very successes built a fatally fragile system. How exactly did they conquer the world, only to turn that conquering power right back on themselves? All right, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the myths and the Republic, then move on to expanding the Roman world. After that, we'll look at how the Republic crumbles, followed by Augustus and the Empire, and finally wrap up with imperial peak to crisis. Section 1, Myths and the Republic, Building the Foundations. So to really understand Rome, we have to look all the way back to its foundation around 509 BC. Now, those legendary tales of Romulus and Remus being raised by a wolf, yeah, that was largely just convenient propaganda. The reality was actually a brilliant new system. The core of their political identity was the res publica, which translates to the public thing. They brought power out into the open so citizens could actually participate, creating this mixed constitution that was highly adaptable, but, as we'll eventually see, incredibly fragile. Right from the start, there was this intense internal friction that really drove early Rome forward. You had the wealthy nobility, the patricians, basically holding all the political cards, and on the flip side, you had the plebeians, the working-class citizens, and the soldiers. And the plebeians literally went on strike. I mean, they abandoned the city and refused to fight just to demand their rights. It was this slow, grinding, two-century internal struggle. But by 287 BC, they'd finally gained equal political rights in almost everything but name. Now, this internal flexibility completely mirrored their external mindset. Rome took good ideas wherever they found them. They were actually willing to let any barbarian become Roman, just so long as they adopted Roman customs. Their ultimate superpower wasn't just, stabbing things with spears. It was their remarkable adaptability and this unique openness to integrating outsiders. Section 2, Expanding the Roman World, the Doctrine of Defensive Expansion. As Rome grew, they adopted this clever and honestly slightly ironic military philosophy, defensively conquering the world. They essentially neutralized perceived threats preemptively, which, funny enough, is magically how you accidentally conquer the entire Mediterranean. But eventually, they picked a fight with a massive rival, Carthage. And get this number, 37. That is the exact number of terrifying, literal elephants that the Carthaginian general Hannibal brought across the treacherous Alps just to attack Rome during the Second Punic War. To a Roman soldier who had literally never seen an elephant before, these were towering monsters with spears on their faces. Hannibal was an absolute nightmare, but this is where Rome's ultimate survival tactic kicked into high gear, pure, unadulterated stubbornness. Faced with Carthaginians' naval supremacy, Rome just reverse-engineered sunken Carthaginian ships to build a southern navy from scratch. Then, when they lost a devastating 50,000-plus men at the Battle of Cannae, they just flat-out refused to surrender. Instead, General Scipio studied his enemy, adapted, and eventually turned Carthage's own famed Numidian cavalry right back against them at the Battle of Zama. Let's trace how this all played out. The Second Punic War kicks off in 219 BC, hits that devastating low point at Cannae in 216 BC, and finally ends with Scipio's brilliant victory at Zama in 202 BC. But the real kicker is that last date. In 146 BC, Rome returned and completely burned Carthage to the ground. This really revealed a distinctly bitter and ruthless characteristic of the Roman state. They didn't just defeat their rivals, they completely erased them. Section 3, The Republic Crumbles, the Price of Expansion. So Rome became so incredibly adept at exporting violence and conquering foreign lands that they eventually turned that exact same violence inward. The price of their massive expansion was basically the destruction of their own political system. Which really begs the question, was the Roman Republic doomed to fail from the start? I mean, the system was originally designed for a small city-state, right? Not a sprawling, wealthy empire spanning across continents. As we dive into the chaotic century of civil wars that followed, we see that the immense personal wealth and military might of individual generals completely outgrew the fragile architectural structure of the Republic. It's a really tragic escalation of violence. It all started with politicians breaking constitutional norms, using unprecedented vetoes just to force legislation through.
Then, a massive invisible line was crossed. Senators literally beat the reformer Tiberius Gracchus to death with chairs just to protect their wealth. And once political assassination was normalized, things escalated so quickly until General Sulla marched his own Roman army right into Rome itself, massacring his political rivals. The seal was completely broken.
Which leads us to a very famous number, 23. That's the number of knives used by senators to assassinate Julius Caesar on the Ides of March. Caesar had completely broken the system for his own personal gain, navigating armies into Rome and naming himself dictator for life. His assassins legitimately thought they were saving the Republic. But as the ensuing chaos absolutely proved, the Republic was already dead. Caesar just put it out of its misery. Section 4. Augustus and the Empire. The monarchy disguised. Into the massive power vacuum left by Caesar stepped his young heir, Octavian, who you probably know as Augustus. He completely outplayed all his rivals to establish a sprawling empire, masterfully disguising this new monarchy as a restored republic. The contrast here is super stark. The old republic relied on shared power and annual term limits, which eventually left it totally vulnerable to massive factionalism and deadly gridlock. But the empire under Augustus, that shifted to one absolute ruler with a life term and centralized military control. By centralizing power in one single person, he finally stopped the endless civil wars, but he fundamentally changed the very nature of Rome in the process. So how exactly did he pull this off? Well, Augustus had a masterful playbook for power. First, he smartly dodged the hated title of king, simply calling himself first citizen. When he fought his civil war, he didn't frame it as Romans fighting Romans. No, he blamed Mark Antony and the foreign queen Cleopatra. He secured the army's absolute loyalty by paying off the legions with confiscated land. He even instituted the Julian calendar, using a giant sundial, literally symbolically controlling time itself. His totalitarianism was just brilliantly built through calculated imagery and tightly controlling the narrative. And all of this resulted in the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This was a period of relative quiet and stability right across the Mediterranean, all established by Augustus. After a solid century of just exhausting bloodshed and chaos, Roman citizens willingly accepted an autocrat. Why? Because he delivered the one thing they desperately needed: peace and stability. Augustus famously declared, "I found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble." And honestly, he really wasn't exaggerating. He initiated these massive building programs like the stunning Ara Pacis, or Altar of Peace. He physically transformed the capital into a sprawling, beautiful monument to his own success, basically using architecture as literal propaganda to remind absolutely everyone how great life was under his rule. Section 5. Imperial Peak to Crisis. The weight of the world. At the absolute height of the Roman Empire, their focus shifted from frantic conquest to administering a massive Mediterranean superpower. The engine that kept it all running thrived on integrated seaborne trade. They constructed awe-inspiring engineering marvels. We're talking massive road networks, soaring aqueducts, and massive concrete megaworks like the Colosseum, all funded by imperial spoils. But we really have to acknowledge the grim reality found in our sources here. This entire majestic system was built and sustained by a horrific, widespread scale of enslaved labor. That was the everyday foundation of their prosperity. Let's track how this played out. After Augustus died in 14 AD, the empire basically coasted on his foundations. Sure, there were hiccups, like the chaotic Year of the Four Emperors in 69 AD, but the system held, and Rome reached its absolute peak physical size by 117 AD. However, you can really only coast for so long. By 235 AD, all that extravagance and the deep structural flaws finally tipped the Golden Age into the absolute chaos of the 3rd century crisis. And here is the devastating recipe for that crisis. The military, which was originally designed to protect Rome, suddenly realized it held all the leverage. So to buy their loyalty, emperors kept ballooning army pay. To actually afford that, they debased the currency, which completely destroyed the economy. Suddenly, the Praetorian Guard and ambitious generals realized they could just casually assassinate emperors and install themselves. We're talking over 20 barracks emperors rapidly and violently replacing each other. And while Rome was utterly distracted fighting itself, the frontiers completely collapsed to outside invasions. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Can an empire built on relentless adaptation survive when its own defense systems become its greatest threat? That is the core irony of Rome's incredible history. They conquered the world by adapting to every single enemy, only to become their own worst enemy. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. I hope it leaves you eager to explore exactly how Rome attempted to survive this ultimate catastrophe.